Welcome to the Accounting Success Podcast. Ian Wellham is a chartered accountant helping other CPA firms maximize their profit potential and become the most relevant advisor to clients. To learn how you can add value, introduce new revenue streams, and move into high-value advisory services, simply go to www.haydenrock.com. On the podcast, Ian brings together successful accountants and industry thought leaders to share with you how they serve business owners and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Ian Wellham.
Hello, and welcome to the Accounting Success Podcast. The editors of Accounting Today magazine describe Tom Hood this way. If there's a conversation going on about the future of the profession, you're bound to hear Tom Hood's name mentioned as one of the people leading the way there. The relentlessly forward-thinking Hood is a consistent force dragging the profession, yes, with some kicking and screaming, into the future. Today's podcast, ladies and gentlemen, is all about the future. We're very excited to have Tom Hood with us. Tom has agreed to spend a few minutes with us and bring us up to date on the state of the accounting profession in the US. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there's no better person, certainly no more qualified person, to give an overview of the profession and to talk about getting CPAs future ready. Tom is the President and CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs and the Business Learning Institute. He's ranked the number 2 most influential person in all of accounting, according to the Accounting Today's top 100 most influential people list. Number 1 on the list, by the way, is God, so I think Tom's doing okay there. This year marks Tom's 11th appearance on the top 100 list. If you own a computer, you're bound to run into Tom online. He's very prolific in social media. In fact, he's one of LinkedIn's top 150 thought leaders and was named in the top 25 influencers in learning by HR Examiner. In addition, Tom and his team have led over 100 strategic planning sessions for the top 100 CPA firms, the AI CPA Leadership Academy, and the Maryland Competitive Coalition. Oh, and by the way, Tom was recently named to the CPA Practice Advisor Accounting Hall of Fame. So it's with a mixture of admiration, awe, and humility that I say hello, Tom, and welcome to the Accounting Success Podcast.
Well, Ian, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that generous introduction.
It was my pleasure, Tom. Now, Tom, I don't think anybody would disagree if I said we're living in a time of tremendous disruption. When I think about the accounting profession today versus the way it was when I first started as a chartered accountant some 30 years ago, I see the profession changing in dramatic ways, especially for this industry.
There's no doubt. I would argue that the pace of change is accelerating, and it's hitting a level we would say is kind of at an exponential pace. And in that kind of change, standing still is dangerous. It's like coasting uphill, right? You're immediately falling behind. So I think that's what's been kind of keeping me up at night, and where we try to prompt some of our CPAs to start thinking more proactively about that future.
I think that thought of coasting uphill means you're going backwards is really very well put. Now, what are some of the biggest drivers of changes happening across the accounting profession?
Well, it's interesting. We've actually done some research. We've engaged with a leading futurist, kind of a global top futurist guy named Daniel Burris, and he's identified what he calls 3 hard trends. And in fact, these 3 trends have been showing up and are, I think, combining to create this exponential pace we're all dealing with. And those are technology, no surprise, but this whole pace of technology, the cloud, new types of ways of doing business, those kind of things, social, everything you could throw into that. The second one is demographics, the generational shift, 10,000 baby boomers a day retiring. And then the third one, which is near and dear to all CPAs, is the increasing pace of standards, regulations, and laws. And that includes, obviously, taxes. So those 3 things are creating this environment where every CPA would name their top challenges as not enough time, being reactive versus proactive, and trying to do more with less. So that's kind of the environment we're all living in right now.
If you could highlight a couple of key mistakes you see CPAs making that make them particularly vulnerable to this disruption and this future move.
Well, I think number one, they kind of line up those trends a bit, but number one would be not thinking about adopting new technology, and especially cloud technologies. We've been surveying CPAs now for a while, and while I think we're approaching a tipping point with CPAs moving to the cloud, and that's every kind of practice there is, many are still reluctant. They're thinking about security issues or other things, and I think there's danger there because I'm seeing even very small practitioners do some amazingly innovative things when they shift to a cloud notion. So moving to the cloud and upgrading your technology would be number one. Number two would be dealing with the demographics, right? So adapting your workforce to reflect the different demographics, and what this translates into is some level of flexibility. I know many baby boomers like me get upset when you talk about work-life balance, but I think it's more like work-life integration. But how a firm can support that is by offering a little bit of flexible scheduling and a mobile environment where they can access everything they need on mobile devices, which again points back to the cloud, right? So that would be the other big one. And then there's some cultural things, not investing in skills for their people, if they're any size of a firm, not investing in what we call people like to call them soft skills, we call them success skills, but skills like strategic thinking, communication, leadership, and collaboration. Those are hands down what we're seeing everyone need. And that actually helps create engagement and retention of that younger demographic. So I think demographics and technology are working the hardest. I would argue then throw in there more and more regulations, peer review standards, audit standards, taxes, all those things are in a bit of flux. And that's further kind of swamping the average CPA. And so the mistake they make, again, not having automated systems, not looking at workflow and some other things, then they're not able to keep up. And they're just constantly on that, falling behind scale.
Yes, I think those are very, very relevant things. One of the great things about doing podcasts is that we get to talk to industry thought leaders like Ron Baker, you mentioned Daniel Burris, Eric Myshak, the CPA Marketer of the Year. And their message, and I think you probably agree, is that business as usual is no longer going to cut it in the years ahead. And yet, I'm sure, meet plenty of CPAs wedded to their old ways. They're doing okay. Maybe there's even a little bit of growth year on year, but they don't necessarily feel the urge to make big changes in what they do day to day. What would your message be to those CPAs?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I know most of those folks. Like Ron Baker's a great friend of mine. I love kind of his message. The fundamental thing here is we call that the gravitational pull of the past. So, just like a rocket leaving Earth's atmosphere, they say they use something like 2/3 or 3/4 of their fuel just to get through Earth's gravity. Well, the fact is most CPA firms, many are first or second generation, so they've been around a while. And in that case, the legacy of success actually makes it extremely hard to change. Throw into that the partners who are real close to retirement and they don't want to risk any money. And so that's another one of those gravitational pull perspectives. So I think, there are a lot of things that you can identify that are holding some back, many back. The flip side of that is what's the opportunity if they actually do something. So we are seeing the firms that are starting to make these changes, everything from going to value billing, starting to change their kind of whole focus to a more proactive, anticipatory approach, firms that are changing their culture. Those firms are actually increasing profitability and market share much, much faster than the firms that are not. So it's the first time we're starting to see what I call the gap is widening, the gap between those who are taking some risk and changing and those who are steadfast holding on to the past.
So if you could encapsulate what the future might look like, perhaps paint a little picture for us.
Well, I think it involves a firm that's much more thinking about value add and proactive services, right? The compliance services, traditional compliance services like audit or even tax, if it's purely compliance, that's a commodity and it's eventually getting squeezed from a price standpoint, or quite frankly, it's getting automated. There's a big buzz about IBM Watson and all kinds of tax services and studies that are saying that. So the new firms are taking that skill set and upskilling it so that they're more strategic thinkers, are able to provide that value-added consult to their clients. So that's number one. Number two, many of them are thinking about billing different. So the billable hour, and that doesn't mean you have to get rid of your timesheets. I know Ron Baker would be upset with that comment, but you have to think about billing for value and not just billing by time. And then it goes to how you treat, how the culture that you keep. So you need a more collaborative culture. You have to involve the young people in a little bit more of what you're doing. Doesn't mean you turn over all the decisions to them, but you have to start asking them what they think and let them actually manage some things and make some mistakes and grow. And then the last piece is you have to have a strategic and systematic way of training them so that you're constantly bringing their skills up. There's a great saying I've heard that says, if you automate, you must elevate the skills inside your team. And I think, so that bucket of things, right? Changing how you're dealing with your clients on a proactive basis, value add. Secondly, thinking about how you're billing and handling those clients differently, and that would incorporate value billing. Third would be changing up that culture so you're more collaborative and you're starting to engage your people more. And then the last one is make sure you're giving them the right skill sets, and that means a strategic and systematic approach to training.
Great. So you mentioned before about how it takes 2/3 or 3/4 of the fuel to get a spaceship out the Earth's atmosphere. How do you get such a massive industry, which has been historically wedded to the reactive thinking, to embrace a sort of proactive approach? What kind of inertia can you create to break through the atmosphere and move forward?
Well, I think, there's a couple things. When we're working with firms in a lot of the strategy work we've done, the key there is to do what we would call large-scale change management, which is to kind of engage a bigger group in the planning. So you might start with your partner group, but very quickly you want to engage your manager group, your senior manager group, and then potentially even your whole firm. And if you get them engaged in the future and where the firm is going and let them have a little bit of say, what do you think kind of thing, then suddenly you're going to get that flywheel. There's more people pushing your firm towards that future. Now, you also have to be willing to take a little bit of risk. It's not a lot of risk, but you have to say, let's try some things and be willing to fail, be willing to pivot if we find out it needs to be tweaked, and get moving. So if you try a policy like flex time, try it, and if it doesn't work, tweak it, right? And continue to evolve it. Instead of the old mentality that we all used to have, and I'm from the boomer generation, it used to be, I want everything perfect and mapped out so I know that everything's going to go right. And I'd spend all kinds of time planning and then start executing. I think the environment we're in today demands that we actually think about strategy about where we're going and then get moving right away and be ready to kind of build the bridge as you drive over it. So in other words, be ready to tweak, be ready to fail fast and learn and then adjust and continue that story, right? That's what I think we need to do to get that momentum. Now, the next step is you need to give the CPAs the right skills, and the skills that they all will say they need, they just haven't taken time on them, are the ones we talked about: strategic thinking, collaboration, communication, right? Those leadership. Well, all those skills we've kind of baked into a program called the Anticipatory Organization. And that program literally allows you to learn more in less time. But all those skills, the idea of being proactive, getting ahead of trends, all that stuff is part of that type of program. And whether you do that program with us or you get those skills on your own, the point is you got to get those skills. You can't just keep trying to catch up and stay in that compliance world.
That's really interesting because all the partners at Hayden Rock have been through the anticipatory organizations through your institute, and it definitely is very thought-provoking. It provides a platform to talk to and actually take action in all sorts of different ways. However, and I use the term firm of the future, it's a term that's been used a lot recently, and it's sort of become a little cliched. I think the point I'm trying to make is many firms that we talk to talk about that, but when we get down into asking them some more pointed questions, they don't know how to make it come alive inside their own practice. They don't have a roadmap to follow. Do you sense that kind of frustration with the firms who want to move forward as well?
Yeah, there's no question that some of them are asking for the roadmap. I like to say they really want the checklist, right? They'd love to have the firm of the future in a box that you could give to them and do. And I would say, I know you guys have been doing some work in that area. I think that's a starting point, but you still have to do the hard work of getting your people to buy in and push that flywheel, right, to break through that gravitational pull. So I think it's an and. I think the answer is there's plenty of models and frameworks and roadmaps that you should go look into. And then I think what you need to do is bring it back and get a group of people that are ready to champion it, that are actually open to making some decisions and choices that begin to change that trajectory. And do that with a lot of intention, and I like to say a lot of co-creation, right? You really need to get your people on board with this effort.
Yes, I agree entirely. And you made a good point, very good point before, that partners who are perhaps coming to the end of their time with a firm, often they might be resistant to change. So if you can set aside a portion of the firm which champion the changes, it's possible to keep everybody happy while the transition takes place.
No question. I've talked to some firms and advised them to say, look, why don't you make a deal that, like, a lot of them have a buyout that's like the last 3 years of your earnings or something is averaged. I think give them a safety net so that they aren't worried about their own retirement. So if there's a buyout that's contingent on earnings, find a way to put a safety net in there so that those folks are protected for some period of time as you make this transition. And that way, they're less likely to get in the way. They're getting in the way because they don't know what's going to happen, and they don't know how much it might cost. And that uncertainty is what they start to resist against.
Now, your experience with firms who've started to make the change, was that sort of dictated from the managing partner, maybe, or was it more of a collaborative effort with other employees like minds? How did the ones who've made the steps forward, in your experience, how did that happen?
There's no question the ones that are moving the fastest are the ones that have figured out a way to involve and include more of their people. So it's more collaborative. If you just do a mandate from the top down, oftentimes that's when the resistance grows and you end up with that challenge. I mean, and that's the bottom line challenge, right? I think we have to, as leaders now, start to think about what's the vector and velocity that we need to change with. So what's the direction? What's our agreed upon goal and future state? And the second part is how fast do we need to move to get there? And those two pieces are what will determine, I think, the ones that win and the ones that lose. And that velocity is a function of who's supporting it versus how much resistance there is.
Mm-hmm. And velocity normally, the faster the velocity is, the more successful it is, because people actually thrive on success. And if nothing happens in the firm, in spite of people trying to make it happen, it can lose momentum and die.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Now, what I hear you saying in general about CPAs needing to become more proactive, perhaps transform themselves from accountants to advisors, and frankly, that's what the clients want. Besides all that, isn't it simply just more enjoyable, more fun to be a business navigator rather than a number cruncher? Absolutely.
And it's funny, I just got an email from one of our firms who's been doing the anticipatory thing, and he tells a story that he went out to one of his tax clients, dropped off the tax return, and then started to talk about the future and trends and what was impacting that guy's business. And his email back was, it was a whole lot more fun talking about the future than just reviewing basic compliance facts. So it is a lot more fun.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it before. I think for millennials and young talent, it's also a huge attraction for firms who look and behave differently.
Absolutely. We like to say if you create that kind of a culture, then you're going to become a talent magnet, and you're going to be sucking talent in from everywhere and keeping it. And that's the next big challenge that we're going to see CPA firms face. It's this whole talent war. It's getting more and more heated, and it's going to continue to get worse for the next 5 years.
Yes, I think actually it's something that we should talk about more. The fact that the type of talent you can attract, your ability to retain talent is increased, substantially if you're a forward-looking firm who is behaving as a business navigator rather than a compliance number cruncher. Do you think that the profession is doing anything to give that message to the new young graduates in the accounting world?
I think it is. I mean, I think I just got back from the AICPA's governing body called Council, and there's all kinds of stuff there from what's the future state look like to these young folks, as well as recruiting them to become CPAs and encouraging it. In fact, the whole CPA exam is changing to reflect some of these value-added skills. There's a lot more strategic thinking being incorporated into the exam, so they're actually trying to use the exam to drive curriculum changes in the profession. So I think overall the profession is trying to position itself from that perspective.
Yes, and I think that's going to improve the quality, and the right kind of person is going to be attracted to public practice because of that. In fact, I think there's also an interesting article in Accounting Today about actually changing the name of accountants to more of a profit advisor. Do you recall that?
I might have heard something about that. I mean, I think, there's no question that for years, half of our profession actually is in what I call the corporate space, not public accounting. And those guys and gals are facing the exact same thing, which is the pressure of a controller to be value added instead of just a steward. So this whole idea is that we got to shift our view from a rear view mirror to a windshield, looking out and being proactive and predictive of what we see and what we know, with being experts in the language of business.
Yeah. Now, through your Business Learning Institute, you've created a conduit, really, to look into the future. We already talked about the idea of the online course for accountants to teach them the anticipatory mindset, ways to identify new opportunities. And in fact, I think that gives a real competitive advantage to the CPA firms who enroll in that. I think it's extremely relevant to today's environment. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about what's involved in that course and the ideas behind it?
Sure. It was developed by Daniel Burris, who does this with global corporations in terms of teaching them these skills. What we did is customized it with Dan, with a group of CPAs, controllers, CFOs, small firm, large firm, kind of a whole village, and created examples that were relevant. Context was relevant to accounting. So it's a series of 28 lessons spread out over 4 modules, and they're basically the other cool thing about this is it's meant to let you learn more in less time. So it's a series of little 3 to 4 minute like TED Talks, single concept videos, and then a rapid application exercise. So you learn a concept like hard trends, then you apply it. There's a worksheet and spreadsheet, all kinds of supporting tools, and you use that to actually write down opportunities or predict these trends, both for your company or firm or for your clients, right? So that's how you can use that. And then you progress through that, but there's all kinds of management techniques about innovation, creativity, collaboration. All those pieces are baked into that system. And so that's the kind of whole way it works. It's about 5 hours of video, but it takes probably 15, 17 hours to go through it. It's meant to do it like 1 hour a week.
Right.
So it's a completely different, and that's been our challenge, right? A lot of people look at it as CPE. Yes, it qualifies for CPE, 5 hours, but it's not really about the CPE. It's about changing how you think and being able to apply it right away to your practice or your company.
Well, I think the secret sauce there is that what you've managed to do, and CPAs are always complaining about how busy they are, you've actually made it so they can learn these important skills no matter how busy they are.
That's the idea, right? I mean, when I was doing it with our team, we all went through it, and I would, do a piece at lunch on my iPad. Then I'd, maybe a half hour and get one of the lessons knocked out. Go home that night, pull up the laptop, and it starts right where you left off, and you keep moving. So you're right, it's meant to do this. You don't have to sit there 3 hours at a time or 4 hours at a time, like typical stuff. So you can just use the pieces, and then you can go back in and refresh. It keeps all your, all the worksheets are there. So it's like a just-in-time performance system once you've been through it.
Yeah, I mean, the thoughts of things like fail fast and the whole idea about thinking like looking for extraordinary answers and thinking like an extraordinary person. And there's numerous things that you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life, I think. So I personally really enjoyed it, and I find that I draw on it all the time. I think that the younger CPAs will really appreciate that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, our experience has been, it's interesting because we would have thought the young ones would have loved it and the older ones may or may not have. The couple of major firms that we've done it throughout the entire firm, their older partners actually loved it for the same reason. They're busy, and it was like being able to do that in little chunks of time, but feeling like they were learning a lot. So you're right, that's exactly the kind of deal.
So as we kind of get towards the end of our time here, Tom, what would you like to talk about that we haven't covered? Let's get into a couple of things there.
Well, I know the kind of things you guys are doing, which is trying to supplement CPAs and give them some more of the tools. I think that's the kind of thing they need to look for, is what kind of organizations that they can actually partner with to bring new ideas into their firm, right? That's a hot one, this whole idea of innovation. I think all that, though, starts with a mindset. So it has to start with the ability to say, are we willing to try new things and begin to change? And to that, one thing I would say to that is we like to say so what's the risk of not changing, right? We like to say the risk of not investing.
Yes.
So once you start to look at where things are going, then you say, if we don't do this, what's the predictable problems that are going to happen? Like, we might start losing some of our great people. Our turnover will increase. Our customers might start dying off. And if you start looking at that, you have to say, then what do we need to do to get moving?
Yeah, that's really good. Now, obviously, you speak to thought leaders and visionaries all the time. What's an idea that you've heard fairly recently that got you really excited?
Let's see. I think it would have to be. Well, to me, I like to spend a lot of time worrying about this pace of change. So I think the notion is, what are those weak signals of disruptive change? That was what I heard by a guy named Andrew Zolli. And I think that notion is, sometimes we don't see, we're so busy, that's probably capsules it. We're so busy doing this current stuff and trying to keep up, we're going to miss those signals of change that are zipping by us. And that idea of starting to pick your head up and look around and pay attention. So it ties back to future ready, right? Which means aware, predictive, and adaptive of emerging trends. So do you see them? Can you predict what it might do to you if you do nothing about it or if you do something? And the third one is, how can we adapt to these changes that we now think are pretty important?
And how do you think you might adjust your radar to pick up on those signals?
Well, I think so. That's the whole point of the anticipatory organization, right? Is begin to learn how to understand trends, cycles, and things like that. I think you have to either become a trend hunter, learn that skill, or you have to find a partner with someone that actually is up on that stuff. But
Yes,
you're going to have to pay attention.
Yeah, I think you said one of the phrases I think you used was pick your head up and look, see what's out there. That's really important. Just as sort of a quick summary, given where we are today and what's on the horizon, what advice might you give to a young CPA coming up?
The best advice we give to everything from students to young professionals is keep your L greater than C squared. That means keep your rate of learning greater than the rate of change and greater than your competition. And that competition for a young person could be the people in the desk next to them or people in similar positions, because it is competitive. If you're an organization, it's the same principle, right? How fast are your competitors learning and changing versus you? So that would be my number one thing for young people. In fact, it's the one thing they will actually write down when I talk.
Right. That's a very nice little formula there, Tom. I think it's a really good one, and as you say, I'm not surprised they write it down. Tom, I have to say this was a lot of fun, so much fun, in fact. I'd like to thank Tom Hood, President and CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs and Business Learning Institute, for sharing his insights today. Thank you very much, Tom.
Ian, I love being here with you.
So if people want to learn a little more about you or the Business Learning Institute, what's the best way for them to do so?
All right, so our website is www.blionline, all one word, .org. So blionline.org. Or look me up, Tom Hood, on LinkedIn. I'd love to have them connect or follow me there. And that's got my email addresses on either the BLI site or LinkedIn. So those would be the two best ways.
That's great, Tom. Okay, so there you have it. This is Ian Wellham saying goodbye for now. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Accounting Success Podcast.